Captions, my name is Sarah, and today I am here to share with you my December reading wrap-up. The month of December was a little bit crazy just in terms of life stuff in general, which is why I only made one video the entire month. But I was also doing a lot of reading because I was really pushing hard to complete my 100 books challenge, and I had a fair amount of ground to cover in the final month of the year. But I am pleased to say that with my flurry of reading and not making like any videos, I did finish my 100 books, and I am super glad that December 2016, that reading goal, all of those things are done. And now let us jump into the statistics for the final reading month of 2016. In the month of December, I read a total of 11 books for a grand total of 4,734 pages with an average of 430 pages per book. 7 of those books were new reads and 4 of them were rereads. 4 of those books were part of a series and 7 of them were standalones. In regard to the genre breakdown, 3 of the books were fantasy, 1 was historical fiction, 1 was a classic, 1 was literary fiction, 3 were faith or theology based, and 2 of them were contemporaries. 8 of those books were for an adult audience, 2 were for a young adult audience, and 1 of them was for a children or middle grade audience. Looking at the character diversity, 2 of the books did not have any diverse characters represented in them, 4 of the books had ethnic diversity represented in their characters, 2 of the books had multiple kinds of diversity represented, and 3 of the books were nonfiction and therefore did not have any characters represented in them. Of those characters, looking specifically at the protagonists, 3 of the books had diverse protagonists, 5 of them did not, and once again, 3 were nonfiction and therefore did not have a protagonist. Moving on to the setting, 3 of the books were once again nonfiction and therefore did not have a setting. 1 of the books took place in a fantasy realm, 2 of the books took place in the United States, 4 took place in the UK, and 1 took place in Germany. Looking at the author gender, 4 of the books were written by men and 7 of them were written by women. Moving on to the publication year, 1 of the books was published in or before the 1920s, 1 was published in the 1940s, 1 was published in the 1980s, 1 was published in the 1990s, 3 were published in the 2000s, 2 were published between 2010 and 2015, and 2 were published in 2016. And finally, moving on to the star ratings, I gave 1 book 2.5 stars, 1 book 3 stars, 1 book 3.5 stars, 2 books 4 stars, 1 book 4.5 stars, and 5 books 5 stars for an average of 4.23 stars per book, but most of those 5-star books were rereads. And now let us move on to the books. Up first we have Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince by J.K. Rowling. So Half-Blood Prince is one of those books that I have always enjoyed, but it was never one of my favorites in the series. In a lot of respects, it felt like the middle book in a trilogy to me, because so often you get middle book syndrome where most of the middle book is just set up for the big finale, and that's a lot of what Half-Blood Prince has always felt like to me, because you spend so much time learning more and more of the backstory of Voldemort, and that's what a lot of this book is dedicated to. And so on most of my previous reads, it has just felt a little bit like a traditional middle book where it's really just set up for the finale. But even though the story didn't change, something about reading it for the 4th time, I just appreciated so much more the complexity of the story. And even though, yes, a lot of it is set up for all of the things that come to play in book 7, so many of the threads that J.K. Rowling has been weaving from the very beginning of the story really start to come together. And I just appreciated the complexity of the story so much more, and definitely bumped this one up in my general opinion of it in the series as a whole. Up next, we have The Girl Who Raised Fairyland All the Way Home by Catherine M. Valente, the 5th and final book in the Fairyland series. So you guys have heard me gush about this series a fair amount now. If you have watched some of my previous recent wrap-ups, I love this series so much. It is one of my favorite things that I read this entire year, and this book was the perfect conclusion to the series. I could not have imagined a better way for everything to wrap up. And while part of me didn't want to read it because I didn't want the adventures that September had and my experience with this world and the writing style and all the wonderful things I love about the series to end, truly, like I said, I could not have imagined a better ending for it. It was absolutely wonderful. I do intend to do a full series review on the whole quintet in the coming weeks, so if you would like to hear more specific thoughts on this book and the series in general, definitely keep an eye out for that one. But I can basically just tell you right now that review can pretty much be summed up in this series is wonderful. Go read it right now. Up next, next we have As Sure as the Dawn, the third and final book in the Mark of the Lion trilogy by Francine Rivers. So similar to the first two books in the series, which I reread back in November, this series is really hard for me to talk about objectively because I read it for the first time 10 years ago. I absolutely fell in love with it. It was very formative for me. But I did notice on this reread that there are some things that are potentially problematic, looking specifically at some of the relationships between a few of the characters and some of the attitudes that certain characters have about different things. And I'm actually intending to do a discussion video in the near future about the situations like that where relationships or attitudes that certain characters have about certain things are affected by their historical setting and the culture that they came out of, and how to sort of separate those two and recognize that this attitude is problematic, but it was also representative of the culture and time, and we'll get into all that later. But I love this series for a whole lot of reasons, but if you do decide to read it for the first time, just go into it recognizing that there are some things that could potentially be problematic and it could maybe be personal things that you take issue with. But like I said, it's hard for me to talk about the series objectively because I have such an emotional, nostalgic love for it. Up next we have Austenland by Shannon Hale. So my final TBR challenge for the year 2016 was to read a book by an author with my initials, Sarah Hayes, Shannon Hale. This is the one that I picked up. It is basically like a chick flick in a book form. It is about this woman named Jane who is sort of obsessed with Pride and Prejudice and Mr. Darcy, and her obsession has had a negative impact on her actual relationships with real people and real men and the like. And so her old aunt dies and leaves her a trip to this place in England where you basically act like you live in the Regency era for the entire time that you're there. So she goes on this vacation thinking that this is going to be like her final hurrah, the thing that she needs to do to like get the Darcy thing out of her system. And you know, it's a chick flicky contemporary thing, and so you know, romantic things happen and all that jazz. I mean, in general the book was fine. It was a quick read, it was an easy read, there wasn't anything particularly amazing about it. It was just kind of there, I guess is the best way to put it. So I mean, if you're looking for just a like super fluffy contemporary chick flicky type thing, then this would probably fit the bill quite splendidly, but unless you're looking for that, I wouldn't necessarily recommend checking it out. Up next we have Desiring God by John Piper. So this is the book that I've probably had on my shelf unread for the longest. I got it, I think, my sophomore year in high school, maybe my junior year in high school, so like 2004, 2005-ish time frame, and it's you know, it was 2016 and I finally read it. I started it and stopped it goodness knows how many times, but I'm really glad that I finally pushed through and read it. If you are in the Christian circle and you are familiar with John Piper, this book is pretty well known. It's sort of like his quintessential piece of theological literature, and I'm really glad that I read it. He's verbose at times. There were a lot of moments, particularly near the end, a couple specific chapters where I was like, okay, we get it, like we don't need more examples of this thing to prove your point. So there were definitely moments where I thought it could have been edited a little more tightly, but I did really appreciate a lot of the insights that he has, and it gave me a lot of really great things to talk about. I'm going through the book with my mentor right now, so I'll be continuing to process some of those things in the coming months. But if you have sort of had your eye on this and just never actually picked it up, I would definitely recommend checking it out. Up next we have The Greatest Gift by Anne Voskamp. This is an Advent devotional that I picked up for the first time in 2014. As with most devotionals, you read one thing a day. This one starts on December 1st and goes through December 25th. I love Anne Voskamp's writing style. I read her book 1000 Gifts a couple of years ago and fell in love with it, and this is the third year that I've read this Advent devotional because there's something very calming about it. Christmas is obviously a really crazy busy season, and something about just taking 5 or 10 minutes a day to read the few pages and just to sit and think about some of those things, which is very calming and relaxing. And if you are looking for an Advent devotional in 2017 and you've never read this one, I would definitely recommend checking it out. Up next we have Did You Ever Have a Family by Bill Clegg. I first heard about this book late 2015 when Max from Well Done Books read and loved it, and then Mari from My Name is Mari Ness also read and loved it, and I am super, super glad that I picked it up because it was absolutely beautiful. Basically, this is a literary fiction standalone novel that follows a woman named June, and on the night before her daughter's wedding, June's daughter, her daughter's fiance, her boyfriend, and then her ex-husband all die in a house fire, and June is the only survivor. And this book basically chronicles her processing of the grief, but also all of the people that are in the different communities that are somehow connected to those 4 people that died. So you get perspectives of the fiance's parents and some people that knew him when he was little, and June's boyfriend's mother and other people within that community. So it hops around from character to character, but they're all very well developed. They all have very unique voices, and this story was, I mean, it's beautiful. It's hard to read. As you might imagine, it deals with a lot of really tough topics, and so it's not necessarily a book you can just like sit down and speed through, but Bill Clegg's writing style is absolutely beautiful. He can set a mood like so few writers. I don't know that I've ever really encountered a writer that can set a mood as quickly and as masterfully as he does in this story, and there were just so many wonderful things that I really loved about this book. And if you are a fan of literary fiction, if you're a fan of those slower stories, then I would definitely recommend checking this one out because it's exquisite. Up next we have Rich and Pretty by Rumaan Alam. This was one of my book of the month picks from last year. I think I picked it up in July or August, I don't remember exactly when, and it was super intriguing when I picked it up. It's basically the story of two best friends who've been best friends since they were like 11 years old, and one of them is getting married now, and so it's sort of about female friendship and how that changes, and how when you've had a friend that you've been friends with for that long, how the different dynamics of it come into play. Some of it is just sort of like habit and nostalgia, but then there is a genuine like love that you have for that person, and how those friendships change when you move into different life stages, when one of you is married with children and the other one's still single, and all this stuff. And I loved the idea of this book. It sounded super fascinating, which is why I decided to pick it up, but so many elements of it just fell flat. I didn't find the writing to be particularly great. The characters weren't unlikable necessarily, they just weren't that captivating. The story was fine, but there just wasn't anything particularly grabbing about it. By about 2/3 of the way through, I was pretty much speed reading and skim reading just to get through the rest of the story. I did read it in one day, so it does read pretty fast, but overall just a lot of elements of it fell flat, and it really just wasn't a great read for me, unfortunately. Up next we have Miracles by C.S. Lewis. So a couple of years ago my parents got me the main theological books that C.S. Lewis wrote, and this is the final one that I had to read. So I've now read all of my C.S. Lewis books that I have on my shelf, and this one makes your head hurt. Like a lot of Lewis's books. This one though, it starts really kind of complicated, and there were a lot of things in the early chapters where I was like, I don't even understand what you're talking about, dude. But the more you progress into the book, and later in the book when he gets past sort of like a theoretical discussion of what miracles could be, how could they be possible, all that jazz, and he actually gets into discussion about specific miracles mentioned in scripture, it made a lot more sense, and it was a lot easier to follow and read. If you are a Lewis fan, highly recommend checking this one out. Obviously, it's one of his sort of quintessential books. Just be prepared to sort of slog through the beginning of it a little bit. That beginning part was definitely difficult for me to read, but overall I did really enjoy this book, particularly the latter half. So again, if you're a Lewis fan, I would recommend checking it out, but if you've never read Lewis before, I would definitely start with some of his other books before you pick this one up. Up next we have Middlemarch by George Eliot. So I started this book back in the month of November, and I went back and forth about whether or not I was going to actually try to finish it before the end of the year. I debated just waiting until 2017, but I pushed through. I'm glad that I did, and overall I did wind up enjoying this. It is basically about a town called Middlemarch, or an area of, called Middlemarch, and it's about the people that live in that area and about all of their interweaving lives, and you just sort of hop around from character to character and see the different families and how they interact with each other and who gets married to whom, and there's, marriages and wills and jobs and crazy things that happen, and, all sorts of fun stuff that you often come across in classic literature. I will probably reread this sometime in the future, largely because I was trying really hard to finish it before the end of the year, so I wound up reading like half of it in one day, which is like a 900-page book. So I read 450 pages of this book in one day, and I was definitely skim reading at points, and I know that there are things that I missed because something would happen and I would be like, what is going on here? I'm pretty sure I missed something. So I will, I'm sure at some point, go back and really pay more attention and read it, but overall I did really enjoy it, and if you're a fan of a classic lit and haven't picked this one up, definitely do so. And finally, my final book of 2016 was Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows by J.K. Rowling. If you watched my videos from last year, you know that Deathly Hallows is my favorite book in the Harry Potter series. I adore it with every fiber of my being. It is one of my all-time favorite endings to a series ever. I love the way that J.K. Rowling wrapped everything up, of how she pulled all of these threads that she'd been weaving together and just tight, and it made this beautiful picture, and there's so many things that happen in this book that I just, as a writer, I'm so fascinated by how complex the world was and how all of these things just sort of fit together and weave together finally, and The final battle between Harry and Voldemort is one of my all-time favorite scenes in the entire series. And I also just really love the character arcs, some of them that really just come full circle. Neville in particular. I don't want to get super spoilery by talking about some of the connections that happen in earlier books and the like, but the role that he plays in the Battle of Hogwarts and how that brings his character full circle, particularly in light of a lot of the stuff that we learn in some of the books like Order of the Phoenix and the like. I love it. I love so many things about this book, this series. It has my heart in so many ways, and it was the perfect way to end out 2016 and my 100 books challenge. Well, there you have it, friends. That is my final reading wrap up for the year 2016. If you have read any of these books, I would love to hear your thoughts, so please let me know in the comments below. If you want to follow me elsewhere online, you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Goodreads, all at Sarah Ann Hayes. The links for those profiles will be in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye! My December. Here to share with you my December. Keeping luck and blah.